Here's your Sunday afternoon weather update on Hurricane Irma, a system with winds now of 110 miles an hour, lower than they've been at any point in the last several days, but it is still a dangerous storm. It's moving northward at 14 miles an hour. You can clearly see the eye is right on the west central coast of Florida, and the radius of hurricane force winds is about 70 miles. What that means, the east coast of Florida is not getting the steady winds at 70, but they are seeing tropical storm force winds, which is between 40 and basically 75. And the winds will still gust to near hurricane force or over hurricane force, really for all of central Florida. It's moving northward. Computer models have not changed a whole lot in what this is likely to do. Heading over Tampa, possibly getting back out over water for a short while, not necessarily long enough to strengthen it, and then moving back inland, heading towards southwest Georgia, northern Alabama, and then western Tennessee before fading away across the Ohio Valley. It is a big system, and as the winds are slowly diminishing, as we move through the middle of the night, average wind speed 2 a.m. about 85 miles an hour. That's an improvement. Monday afternoon, 2 o'clock, average wind about 65 miles an hour, and you can add 10 miles an hour easily because we don't know for certain, but the message is the overall winds will diminish as it moves toward the north. But the threats still continue. Now, into North Georgia, central Georgia, by the afternoon or overnight going into Tuesday, winds about 40 miles an hour. So it will transition from being a windstorm to being a storm that produces rain, potentially heavy rain, northern Alabama, northern Mississippi, western Tennessee, all the way up into Indiana and Ohio. Here's what we have right now for hurricane warnings. Virtually all of the state of Florida, with the exception of the Panhandle, under a hurricane warning. Parts of the Panhandle are under a tropical storm warning, and notice how they go into North Georgia due to the fact that the Atlanta area, for example, could see steady winds just over 40 miles an hour. We're not talking extremely high, but still steady winds over 40, near 40 or over. And then tropical storm warnings back out to the coasts of South Carolina and Georgia, where there are also storm surge warnings due to the fact that the wind is pushing water up against those coastlines. That's what's happening now. And the storm surge warning you see for the west coast of Florida, that's what will begin to happen as the storm moves a little bit farther north. I'll show you that in just a moment. Also, flash flood watches. Rain, a big issue. Already some spots I've seen reports 5 to 10 inches. Those are easily average reports, but it's going to keep adding up, especially ahead of the storm. The threat of tornadoes continues. If you've been watching the radar today, you've noticed tornado warning after tornado warning after tornado warning. All of that is far removed from the center of the storm, and that always confuses people. You expect the center to be the worst part, which on average it is, but look at those bright red bands coming in from the Atlantic Ocean. Within those bands, small thunderstorms that begin rotating and potentially produce tornadoes that can have wind well over 110 miles an hour. So even though the eye is not where the tornado threat is, in fact, current, as of I speak time, current tornado warnings for the east central coast of Florida, within those areas, you could see more devastation than where the eye is. As I speak, late afternoon Sunday, the eye just south of Fort Myers, it moved over Marco Island, producing winds gusting to 130 miles an hour. And within that bright red band, that's where you tend to have the highest wind speed. Notice the winds for the west coast, they are blowing offshore. They're blowing out to the Gulf of Mexico. For the east coast, the winds are blowing onshore. So tornado threat for the east coast, storm surge threat for the east coast. But as that storm moves northward, then the threat starts to shift. Here's a computer projection. Late this evening, as it moves farther northward, heading toward Tampa Bay, notice the west winds kick in for the west coast of Florida. So storm surge on the north side, the front right side of the path, and then storm surge on the rear left side of the path, simply because Florida is a peninsula. So both coasts still have that threat. And as you know, South Florida doesn't have a lot of elevation. You could see that water piling up pretty high. As the system is projected to move Monday morning, 8 a.m., North Florida, Tallahassee, perhaps seeing flooding rain, same thing for South Georgia, Albany, Valdosta, and then the core of it slowly weakening. Notice this is Monday evening projection, rain going into the mountains of North Georgia, Tennessee, and northern Alabama. So these are the threats, the transition, and then just basically raining itself out going into Tuesday and then the middle of the week. Talk about the eye wall. I've mentioned this the last couple of days. That's where you tend to find the highest wind. If the eye passes right over you as it comes in, you get that east wind. As it goes out, you get the west wind. And in between, you have perfectly calm weather, which is really misleading. because once that eye goes north, in the case that we are looking at right now, you have to deal with what the feeder bands are doing, and the feeder bands bring in the wind, they bring in the rain, they bring in the threat of tornadoes, in this case in the front right path, and they also rotate with the storm. But here's the issue for the west coast of Florida. So far today, it's been rain north of the center of the storm, and it's been windy, but once it goes north, the winds suddenly shift, and that's when the water literally begins surging inland behind the storm. So again, you get the wind, the eye wall, it's calm, then the wind shifts, and all of a sudden the water starts surging in. Now a storm surge, the water comes in, it surges, it gets higher, comes in, surges, gets higher, comes in, surges, gets higher, and this could all be within a matter of minutes. People had asked me the difference between storm surge and a tsunami. Tsunami is not related to the wind, it's related to earthquakes underwater, and that's when you get the wave. First of all, it could be sunny and calm. At the beach, the water goes out, and then it all comes back at once. So that's a tsunami. Storm surge is surging water bit by bit. And there was a video you may have seen from the Bahamas about the Hurricane Irma sucking the water out of the ocean. I think it was a little misleading. Now, this is not the Bahamas. This is Mobile Bay, Hurricane Danny in 1997. But folks who live around the Mobile Bay area know the bay is very shallow, and when the wind blows from north to south, it literally pushes the water out of the bay, and that's what happened with Hurricane Danny. So the video you see in the Bahamas, even though it said ocean, I think it was a bay. I couldn't really tell from the video. I do know there was a man, let's say he was 6 feet tall. He jumped off the pier, walked on the water. The pier was right about his height. If you look at the average tides in the Bahamas, in that location, they're about 4 feet from high tide to low tide. So that bay, it's probably a bay, it's probably shallow, and it wouldn't be unusual to have the winds blowing water out of a bay, even though it looked pretty dramatic. Now the hurricane, it does have some differences with pressure, where beneath the center of the hurricane, the water does rise up a little, and on the fringes it does go down a little. So I wasn't there. That's just my first thought. For the News 5 area, WKRG, a dry northeast wind. We'll get a few showers coming in from the east as Irma passes by. That's Monday afternoon at 5 o'clock. So we'll get some rain. We'll get some wind. We have a wind advisory for winds to move between about 25, 35 miles an hour. In the Florida Panhandle, the farther east you go, the higher the wind gusts you will see. But overall, it's relatively quiet for the WKRG News 5 area, which is my home base. There's Jose. It's in the Atlantic. It's no threat to any islands. It's going to go north. It'll probably loop, and it remains to be seen if it will approach any islands later in the week. Way out in the eastern Atlantic, another tropical disturbance. It's the peak of hurricane season. That may become the next tropical depression, but it's too early to project what it could do and what it may do. Hurricane Irma is the big story. If you are anywhere in Florida, keep up with your local broadcasters, your local National Weather Service. They can give you the better details on potential storm surge, the threat of tornadoes. Make sure you have a safety plan, and make sure you can do the best you can do to keep yourself, your pets, and your family, and everyone you know in a good position. So stay safe from Irma. I'm Chief Meteorologist Alan Seals.